So premature optimization, you've heard the saying, is the root of all evil. What do I gain if I take a large method and divide it up into smaller methods? One would say readability. If I name my methods for exactly what they do, they become more readable. Downside to that is navigation. Now I have to go and start digging in all to the different methods, whereas before I would see the code in one glance, you might say. And I ask you, why do you need to see the code? If you're looking at method A, the name of the method should describe what it does. Only if you want to know the internal functioning of what it calls, then you need to look at the code. And then you navigate to that other method. There is no reason for you to drill down to the last method to understand the 50 line of code block that you just refactored. Use names. We can do this as well. Basically, every time you have a parameter that is defining behavior in a method, think about splitting that method up into more than one method. Don't allow parameters to define behavior. Parameters should be used to operate on. Sum of two numbers. Now, object-oriented zealots would say, well, even that you shouldn't do. You should do an extension method on a number, on an int, that adds another number. But that's a little bit pushing it. But think about parameters always as how they're values that are used to operate on, not define the behavior. Because if I don't define behavior by parameters, my net method name can explicitly tell me exactly what that method does. If I do that, what do I gain? Readability. And smaller methods that are easier to maintain. Everything I'm saying here boils down to the same thing, creating maintainable code. And one way to do that also is through naming. Take a class. What do I name the class? I gave this talk yesterday in Gothenburg, and during lunch one guy said to me, fine, what if I take a class and put 50 methods in it, each method being very, very small? That's okay, it's readable, no? Yes, but what do you name the class? Jack of all trades? Right? Back in the old days I used to say, oh, when I name classes I just call them A, AB, ABC, and then later I figure out what to call it. Now I realize that that was a mistake. Because I'm not really, it's not aiding me to define responsibilities of that class. And there's anti-patterns to naming things. One of them is manager. Another one is service. Another one is services. Right? We slap on a service to any name we do and that's it, it's great. Now it's done. Now I can just throw everything in there because it's a service. Interface segregation. This is one of the other principles that is very linked to SRP. Do you work with ASP.NET? Membership. Have you ever written a membership provider for ASP.NET? Or a role provider? Right? So it's this clunky interface that has like 100 calls. And then when you want to extend it, write your own, you go to the MSDN documentation and it says, oh, if you want to do this, just implement these two interfaces. That's it, right? So I have a line of code over here. And I do some. Yeah, okay. Some method. Another method, and now I'll go and create a derived type from this. Okay? And I end up with this. Because it's an interface, I have to define all the methods, right? Now I say, for this guy, I only need another method. So I'll go and implement this. Right? I'll write some code here. Some more code. And this one I'll leave blank. I don't need it. It's not needed for the functionality that I require, so I'll leave it blank. Now that's just being half mean. You could be really mean and do that. And I don't mean, you know, not even to your work colleague, to yourself in 6 months, right? You could be nice. You can say, don't need this. Right? Or you could just say, don't need it. If it returns a type, you got to do something. You know, I mean, I have seen this so often. Return. Can't do that. But you can do this. Yeah? So now I look at that code and I'm like, what's some method do? It returns 0, okay. Maybe the bug is there. But it's there because it doesn't do anything. And this is no joke, but I was confronted with this problem in a language that I did not understand, in an environment that I didn't know. Right? Working at a previous company, a guy, colleague of mine, writes some code in for the iPhone. And I swear, this is no joke, the method was saying connect. And it was blank. He leaves the company, we get reports 3 months later that my iPhone doesn't connect to Exchange server. I have absolutely no idea of iPhone or Xcode or anything, or Objective-C. So I said, well, let me give it a try. I go look at the code. Oh, connect is commented out. Right? Because there was a method connect, but the call to connect was commented out. Right. So it doesn't connect. The code to connect is commented out. Maybe there's the problem. But then it's like, how can that be the problem if other people are working with it? And we have not updated this system. So it can't be that. Maybe, and now the, ideas start to go through your head. Maybe those people got the previous version, then he did an update, pushed it to the App Store, it got approved, and they downloaded the new version. And he didn't leave on good terms. Maybe this was just him being a complete asshole. Okay? Turns out the bug wasn't even there. The bug was that the people were using, the ones that it wasn't working for, they were using a new version of Exchange, which had changed the API. Right? But I lost 3 hours looking at that code and scratching my head and saying, wonder if it's because it's not going connect. And this stems from the same thing as over here. When I have an interface, I have to define exactly what that interface does. Because for me, it's a contract. An interface is a contract. I have to say to anyone reading that interface what this interface is about to do. And it has to do every single thing that interface says, not only half of it. The problem with the role provider and membership providers is exactly that. It's got 100 methods and you only need to implement 10 of them. And if you're not familiar with the code, if you don't have documentation, readability is reduced. Bugs can appear because people don't know what they have to implement, what they don't have to implement. Okay? All of these are about one thing and one thing alone, minimizing change. If I start to have small classes, each of these interfaces doing simple, one-off things, when do I have to change those classes? When I have to change that thing that that class does, and only that thing. Therefore, there's less risk of me breaking other things. Of course, even if you do all that, you're not safe. You still need these other things called unit tests. But the problem with unit tests is that it's hard to write if you don't have maintainable code. If you do drag and drop development and you do RAD application, line of businesses as defined by Microsoft, it's hard to do unit testing. And it is expensive. And it's painful and it's slow. But all these stem from one thing: bad code. Or non-testable code. Composition over inheritance, that's another one. Multiple inheritance we don't have in C#, so already if you're using inheritance, you end up with, you can't inherit from more than one class. But the other problem is when you start to have a large inheritance chain. So you have a top class and another class and another class and another class. Somewhere in between those three classes, one class has methods that are completely irrelevant to it, that aren't used. And then you say again, when do I call these methods? When don't I? Do I need them? Don't I need them? Do I need to overwrite them? Don't I need to overwrite them? That can be solved with composition. What do we gain? We gain readability. This is one that's very important, and yet people don't think about. If you use ASP.NET MVC, there is a method, HTML helper in there, called editor4. And you pass it in a class, and it creates 3 elements for you for each property of that class. It creates a span, in the HTML span, it creates a text box, and it creates a validation element. So that when I pass in a customer that has a name, first name, last email, it will generate those 3 elements for each of those properties. You can pass in single properties as well. You would think that if you pass in a single property, it would generate what? A span, the text box, and the validation for that single property, right? No. It just generates the text box. Why? Because you are passing in a different parameter. But the parameter says a type. Yes, but you're passing in a complex type versus a simple type. So you're saying to me that based on the type of parameter I pass in, what are you doing? You're defining the behavior of the method. You're changing the behavior of the method. If my method is editor4 and behaves in one way with one parameter, don't change the behavior and introduce an element of surprise for me if I change the parameter that I pass in. And yet that's, right now, even in MVC3, that is there. Confirming to dry. Don't repeat yourself, right? Now people have taken this way too far. Some people plug in an add-on to Visual Studio which prohibits you from using copy-paste. Yeah, they need help. Confirming to dry. Dry means don't repeat yourself. And I won't say that again. No. Okay. Oh, we're starting to cheer up, aren't we? No. The snow is drying. So, do you get it? The snow is drying. No. It means don't repeat yourself. So if I have, for example, code that says, if user is authenticated, do this. If user is authenticated, do this. And I have that in every method call that I have in my service layer. Or I have try, catch, log, try, catch, log, try, catch, log. You're doing dry there. I mean, you're breaking dry there. You're constantly repeating the same code over and over and over again. And that's not solved by using code snippets or templates or anything like that. You don't have to write that code. Those things can be solved in different ways. One of those ways is called aspect-oriented programming, which is taking class. Each class has a single responsibility. However, there are things that are cross-cutting across multiple classes. For example, logging, authentication, etc. You can solve those problems with AOP. And I won't go deeper into that because Jonathan will then talk to you about AOP later in the day.